Yes, thanks for joining me.
Hey, okay, mate. Appreciate the time.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this because you're involved in a lot of different things. I know you wear multiple hats, and so I'm excited to hear about some of the things that you've done in the past and also some of the things you're doing today. But what I'd love to do with people is really get a little bit below the surface, find out about their journeys. And to do that, we jump in a time machine and go back to, say, when you were 4 or 5 years old. Like, take us right back in time. What was life like for you? Where were you living? And yeah, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my whānau's from Ngāti Porou, East Coast Gisborne, and I grew up on a farm actually until I was about 4 years old, 4 or 5 years old. So my first memories was actually on a farm in Dargaville, way up north, and then moved to Fiji right when I was 4 or 5 years old. So from farm to the beach, that was kind of the start point. So pretty rural upbringing, had horses, cows, sheep, and all that stuff, and then shifting over to Fiji kind of changed the game a little bit as well, just because, you know, it gives you perspective on life a lot quicker. Like I remember pretty clearly we were the levels of wealth in my class were, if you had a concrete house or if you had a tin house. We had a concrete house, so we were considered rich, or if we had leather sandals, not plastic sandals, or no sandals, So I got perspective pretty early on, but basically at 4 or 5 years old, I was already charging around and up to all sorts of mischief. So I wrote my first car off actually when I was 4 years old as well. Took my papa's car, started up, sent it off a cliff. That was fun.
Wow.
So I've been causing mischief for more than a few decades now.
That's awesome. And the thing that I love about learning about you is it seems like you have a real heart for people and helping others. And I'm just wondering, to what extent does that even trace back to those earliest times in Fiji? Because it's a very different culture. It's a different way of being. Do you think there was influence on you from that young age at that point?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my dad was working for a like a Habitat for Humanity type business, and so we were helping build affordable housing and getting clean water to sort of rural villages and stuff. So some of my first memories were, literally out in these little communities and tribes that had no power, and we were helping do the housing stuff for them and getting fresh water in there, and those first early memories always were very much a pretty key point. And my mum's always had a pretty big interest in that, so even still today she still works with Women's Refuge and Salvation Army, and she's been a teacher and help out with nurse aiding and all sorts, so very much like kind of from the caring side, and then just kind of growing up through all that, you get perspective at an early age and you kind of see things a bit differently. And I think probably just being like grateful as well, because I mean, regardless of what I do now, people kind of know where I've come from. It's not like, I've just popped up with a silver spoon in my mouth, like I remember, we talked about, I used to live in rented out a friend's bathroom for a winter with no heating, paid $40 a week, chucked all my gear in the bathtub, put a little foam mattress down on the ground, closed the door next to the toilet and the sink. And that was me, So, growing up in Aranui, going through the journey that I've sort of been through, anything good or crazy that happens now, everyone knows exactly where I've come from. And I think that's pretty cool, because it's definitely like authentic to me. And I don't think it's possible to be able to, I think it'd be disrespectful to my past to not to be able to, like happily claim that and be proud of that whole journey, because, it for me anyway, it's the older I get, the more crazy of a journey I think it's, I really think it's been.
Mm. That's a good insight. Sometimes when I ask people questions, one of the classic questions would be, what would you change about your past? What would you tell your younger self? But actually it's going through those experiences, isn't it, that actually gives you the wisdom to become who you become. And I think if I told myself what I know now when I was 18, I probably wouldn't have listened to myself, firstly. But also I had to go through those things to be able to shape me into who I am today. Just coming back to that early childhood, I'm really curious, how long were you there in Fiji for? Like, was it several years? These are conscious memories, aren't they? It's an actual thing.
No, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I totally remember growing up on a farm in Dargaville. Then we were in Fiji till I was 8 years old. So
Okay.
4 or 5 years, and then we moved back to Christchurch and moved down to Aranui. And that's where I grew. Sort of was basically grew up till I finished high school. So my business Aranui Ventures is named from where I'm from. You know, everything that it represents definitely from there. So you know, it's tricky because you get quite transient. You know, your whānau's from the east coast in Ngāti Porou, then you're on a farm up north, and then you're on a beach in Fiji, and then you're in Aranui Christchurch, and then you go into Snowboard World, and then you travel around, you know, so when people say, you know, where is home, I've got so many homes, you know, and like genuine homes, you know, like my soul sits in Waipiro Bay, East Coast, Gisborne, you know, my early memories and my, you know, I was named after my grandparents, Ron and Betty. And so that's my first childhood up in the farm. You know, Fiji became that foundation. Aranui became my core. Then, you know, Crush. And then when I got into Snowboard World, Wanaka was basically the beating heart of everything, living and breathing out of there. You know, then I moved to Auckland for the business stuff. And I wouldn't say Auckland, out of all of the places, I would definitely say Auckland's not home as such. You know, that I've lived there, but I wouldn't call it home. And then in the States, you know, now I've been back and forth the last 20 years. So Tahoe's also home. And then my wife's family's from San Fran, so that's also home. So, you know, if I was to die tomorrow, my ashes would get spread in probably a few different places, I'd imagine. But yeah. I actually think that when you have the perspective of lots of different lives and worlds, it gives you a sort of broader approach to how you look at things in life, you know, because you've got to see so many different lenses or so many different angles of stuff. And so it's probably one of the best thing. And also being able to travel the world and meet a million people and all sorts of stuff has been probably pretty rad. But yeah, it's very transient, but at the same time, very sporadically localized.
It's fascinating, the concept of home, isn't it, as well? Because, you know, home is where the heart is. Like there's these proverbs that come out. For me, I'm similar. I have an accent, but I'm actually speaking to you from Otatahi, Christchurch, because I grew up here as well. And this is where I feel most at home. And it's a strange thing, but I feel like in Christchurch, if somebody says, let's meet here, I can get there without telling you the street names. I just get there. Whereas in other cities, I'd be like, oh, well, what's the best way? Whereas here, I feel so comfortable.
I get it.
Yeah, you just go. We got to go to Cal Stadium, play some basketball. I know how to get there, you know? And for me, that's a really significant thing because like you, I've traveled a bit. I've lived in 6 different countries. And in those other places, it's been about the people in those places for me. Yeah. So growing up in Christchurch and Aranui, can you just describe what that was like? Yeah, what was that environment? And yeah, so you're 8 years old.
Yeah,
was it a difficult
8, 9,
transition back? Was it hard to come back to a country that was supposedly your home, but you'd actually grown up in Fiji until then?
Well, it was definitely colder, I would say that. I think probably just the interesting one with Aranui for me was more maybe tension's probably not the word, but I've always sort of lived this dichotomy of this kind of this balance, right? So, you know, I talked about when I was growing up on a farm in far north, I was kind of like a token Māori kid and a bunch of white boys. Then I go to Fiji, and even though I'm Māori, I'm considered probably white compared to Fijian and Indians. And then I come back to Aranui Christchurch, and then in Christchurch, you're kind of surrounded by a whole bunch of white boys again. So then you're kind of there. And then I go into Snowboard World, and it's predominantly rich Pākehā, and I'm poor Māori kid. And then I come into business world, and it's, you know, corporates and suits and boardrooms and all sorts of crazy shit. And then here I am with my like $7 t-shirt on and kick. So I kind of have always sort of had this funky balance with my place and things. I don't know whether maybe that's part of my combative nature as well, because it's basically, you know, it makes it harder when there's more in front of you, you know. And I think for me anyway, my journey is I like winning the battle that's harder, because then it's not only a better story to tell, but no one can question that journey when they know how tough it's been. So, you know, I don't know, for me, was definitely tough. I mean, it wasn't easy. You know, it's, if you don't know Christchurch, you know, it's a low socioeconomic area of town. It's far east. Um, my dad, when I was, you know, 11 years old, he had a double brain hemorrhage, and he went back to the brain capacity of a 6-year-old. So, you know, home was not easy, not good, not safe at times. We're on the benefit. You know, went through all that, and then, you know, when I was 15, then my dad passed away. When I was on New Year's Eve, we were on a family trip up north, and we got in a car crash, and it was horrible, you know. So then I just think of myself in that time, you know, I'm 15 years old, dad's just passed away, we're on the benefit, I'm failing high school, you know, my careers advisor then tells me that I can, you know, work in a warehouse packing boxes. That's what they said I could do with my life. And I'm like, well, I've got nothing wrong with that's what you do to bake bread. I just had a full issue where that was the kind of the limit of what they were saying I could do with my life. And I was just like, stuff you, you know, stuff you. And so I just turned that into fuel. You know, I turned that entire moment that gave me fuel for the next 10, 15 years to get me out of there. And that's exactly what I did. So, you know, I eventually got offered a scholarship actually after my dad passed away to go to Christ College. And I thought it was for sport, but it was actually for kids whose dads had actually died. And they didn't tell me that. They lied to me about it. And I chose to stay at Aranui. I chose to stay with my boys. I chose to stay with my crew. And I was like, stuff that. Like, I ain't leaving, you know. And they're my boys, and still my boys to today. And that was basically it. So, you know, love that place. That's part of the reason, or the main reason I named my company Aranui Ventures, named after where I was from. And so I wanted it to be as a statement of like, you can do it. You can get out there and do different. You can push. You can strive. You can do whatever. And so that's been my my journey. And it's definitely come at a toll of being insanely combative and competitive towards stuff if I'm passionate about it. But net, I don't really regret any of it because it's got me here. And so stuff it, you know.
Yeah. So I'm interested in two things there. I'm going to pick up on it. The first one is just that conversation where you were told this is all you'll ever be able to do. For some people, they would have reacted in a different way and just accepted it, I guess, and gone, oh, well, that's all that I can do. What is it in your nature, do you think, that caused you to react in the opposite way, which is, well, I'm going to prove you wrong? Because it sounds like in each of the circumstances you've described, you've been in the minority. You know, you've been the one who's always in the minority. So you've kind of grown up with that, you know, having to prove yourself in a way. But do you think that was the source of that, or just talk us through that?
Well, it's forever the it's forever the underdog, right? Like I knew that they weren't going to give me it, and I was just going to take it, like stuff them. Like you're not, and because I'd been super competitive at sport, like you need to understand as well. Like my drive for going hard is probably different to most. You know, like I was walking when I was 9 months old. Just full walking. Like I was just sending it in, going at 110% when I was, you know, 11 years old. I was playing for the New Zealand under 14 basketball team. So I was 3 years ahead of my age at 11. And I was like the smallest in the group, played soccer for New Zealand, gone to the national reps for soccer, skated, got third at nationals. You know, like anything I'd go into, I'd just go insanely hard and go and dominate. And so when basically someone said, this is all you can do, in my head, I'm like, well, now you've just given me fuel, and thanks for that. And, you know, I'll see you in the future. And I just kind of said, stuff you, and just went and did my thing. And so, you know, like I went hard, and I became a professional snowboarder, and I traveled the world and ranked number 1 in New Zealand, and I won a silver medal at the world final. So, you know, like I went to the pinnacle of that as well. But for me, it was always like, if I would have listened to them, what would I have done? I would have just stayed and plateaued. And I was just kind of like, stuff that. Like, why can't we do more? Why can't you push more? And so I want a battle, you know, like I want them to, you know, think less of me. I want them, because I need that sort of fuel. And, you know, I went and saw I don't know if it's a psychologist or psychiatrist or one of those a couple of years back. I was trying to decode my head a little bit to figure out like what makes me tick. And he just sort of simply said, mate, you know, you're basically just going from a prove yourself to others mentality to transition to now being able to provide value to the platform which you now have. Because what you don't want to be is the angry, washed up old dude that's just hating on everything, the way things were and blah, blah, blah. It's like, you don't want to be that dude. So, that transition phase has probably just been happening over the last couple of years, as well as I've kind of got out of that, and I've had a few wins and, moved on to the next.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing that interests me is now that you know, because your story is amazing. And I did watch a video when you had your book that came out. And one of the things you were saying to high school students was what's feeding your fire? Don't put water on your fire. Pour petrol, pour gas on the fire and give yourself that boost. And it sounds like in a way, that's what those words of that guidance counselor was. It was fuel to really help you get to the next level.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And just being aware of that too. And the concept of that was, everyone that's around you at these younger years, they're either going to put water or gasoline on your fire. What is it? And then you just need to ask them, are you fueling my future, or are you trying to dampen it? It's pretty simple. And unfortunately, what happens is when you see that the majority of people are putting water on your fire, they got to go,
But the interesting thing to me is the attitude is really important of the individual. And I think this comes through in what you're saying. That person, that guidance counselor, they were pouring water on your dreams and ambitions, really, but you were able to somehow convert it into petrol to really get it going, which is, because I think that's important for the listeners to realize, is that there's going to be negative things that come, but how do you react to them? What happens next? Yeah. Can I come back 100%. To one other point? Because I'm just curious with your life, like you've been successful, you're doing amazing things now, but one of the things that strikes me is with your father passing when you were 15, that must have given you a sense of mortality, or, the sense that the reality is we're here for a short time. We're born, we're alive, and we die. Can you just talk us through, did that, that's a young age for that to happen. Do you think that has had an influence on your approach and things, or are there other factors?
Well, for ages, I'd always wondered, why do I go so hard? And one of the things that I was thinking about is the reason that I continue to push is because I don't have my dad to be there to say, I'm proud of you. Your mother, you can be an absolute, homeless wreck, but your mum's always still going to love you. But, having, your dad say you're proud, if I got that, do you think maybe would I have stopped? Maybe would I have been like, cool, I've made it. I don't need to push anymore. Cool, I don't need to try. And then I thought about it for a bit, and then I realized that, I was walking at 9 months old. I've been overachieving my entire life. Absolutely everything I've done, I've totally pushed and crushed and keep going. So it wasn't. But what it probably did do for me anyway, it just, I'd been playing team sports until he passed away. And then after he passed, I kind of just gave up on the team sports because I wanted to do something for myself that I could control and that I could do. And snowboarding gave me that. It was like expression, it was escapism, it was creativity, it was freedom, it was acceleration, it was everything. So for me personally, it was kind of like that became my escape and my freedom. And I just stayed with it. Like I just kind of, if I want to go do something, like who's to stop me? Like who's to say I can't go and try and do whatever, And so I think if anything, it just made me more committed to the escape of what I wanted. Like my whole thing was I wanted to be able to get to the States and snowboard. I wanted to be able to get on a plane, get to America, snowboard. That was like the only thing that mattered. And then I made it happen, traveled the world, and the rest is history.
Yeah. The interesting thing to me though is because I think you won, the silver and you were professional snowboarder, but then you walked away from that as well. What was your thinking behind that?
It was super easy, man. I was, my game plan was get in, blow up, get out, build up as much leverage as I could, build up as much relationships as I can, build up everything, and then transition into business. That was always the play. And so before I probably totally peaked in my skill set of ability, I made the decision to retire. And it was going to be, so I made the decision to retire before I got the silver medal. I told two people, I told my bro Mitchie and Nate, and I said, after this, I'm quitting, I'm stopping competing, and I'm starting this business, and it's going to be an online, snow media company, blah, blah, blah. and they thought I was absolutely nuts. So basically, I win, I get silver. I come back to New Zealand, and everyone thinks like, oh, Robett's going for blah 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 blah, and I'm like, cool, I'm out, peace. And I was like, what? What? They couldn't believe it, but I knew in my head, I knew exactly what I was doing. And at the start, so many people gave me grief, like I wouldn't necessarily say I was a laughing stock, but a lot of people were just like, oh, look at Robett trying to be the businessman, trying to be all business, blah, blah. And in my head, I was like, just wait 5 years, the second one injury, you'll be out. Second, next thing happens, sponsor drops you, you'll be out. And then, just like clockwork, all those had sort of, navigated off to the side and done whatever. And, I never wish ill will on any of them, but it was awesome to see that my strategy had paid off by becoming a platform and being able to, get paid from everyone all at once instead of just one person and being reliant on your body and your skill set. And it was getting to a point where, it wasn't fun to almost die every day, like jumping off a cliff and it was getting super good. And don't get me wrong, like I was good, but I wasn't like, I don't think I was like the greatest ever. Like, don't get me wrong, like I could shred and it was fun and it was awesome and I was good, but it wasn't like, this is going to buy me Lamborghinis. So my whole thing was, how do I transition out safely? And the way I saw it was, well, my writing was at its peak. I want to start a business, and then I want to slow crossover, and so I can, and then all of a sudden I don't need to be reliant on my body, and that's how it played out. And it was probably one of the coolest things that I managed to do. And most of these times when you're so ahead of the game with what you're thinking, you're crazy until you're not. Like everyone thinks you're nuts until you win, and then you're like, oh man, you actually planned that. And it's like, yeah, like for years. And so, I've been lucky enough to probably have that happen a couple of times now, which has been pretty awesome.
Yeah. The interesting thing I pick up on that though is it's the foresight, isn't it? It's thinking it's the chess game. It's thinking a couple moves
long game
ahead.
chess, mate.
Where
100%. I love chess. Yep.
Yeah. For me, it's a similar picture. Like the chess idea is you've got to be thinking in advance, like several moves ahead. But the other thing that I've often thought of is collecting keys, and the keys will open doors that are locked. So how do you get the key? So in my example, like I work as a lawyer. To me, getting a degree was like getting a key that opened a door that would otherwise be shut. And it's kind of that mentality, isn't it? Putting in the work to then get a key to open something, but you have to have that vision to be able to go, right, this is where I'm headed.
Yeah, it's chess, not checkers. I used to play chess a whole bunch when I was younger. I was in the chess club. I absolutely love chess. And I think of all this as life chess, like all these moves, what are you playing for? And what's that next thing? And it also helps as well when you look at the ecosystem with others and you look at business opportunities, when you start thinking of it like chess, you can sort of start to predict pretty much to the point with what you think is going to happen. And then, navigating to those points gives you a lot more upside for the win.
So if we take that chess picture, one of the things that I see that you're doing and you talk about is the fact that helping people is a big part of your ethos and what you do now. Taking your background, taking your experiences, and now trying to do good and help others. How does that, I guess, what's the motivation behind that? Where does that come from? What does it mean to you to help other people as well? How does that actually translate into practice?
Yeah, so it's not like it's not a conscious thing that I choose to do. I've always done it. I just kind of think in my head, like, if you've got excess and you've got options, it's your duty to give that to others. Like I think about me when I was a young buck, and I think of them as breadcrumbs of like little drops of positivity, which you can leave around everywhere with, introductions that you do, or catch ups or high fives or meetups or events or learnings or whatever it may be. Like all those things are breadcrumbs that can kind of pivot someone's trajectory by 1 degree for good. Like it can be, and you'll never know how much that degree is going to work in its favor. But, if you pivot someone, 1 degree today for good, in 10 years time, they're going to be in a totally different trajectory. And you'll kind of I guess I'm sort of playing, like generational chess with those relationships and those upsides, because I don't know. And a lot of time I've put time into stuff and I get burnt, or I feel I get used or whatever. But if, as long as there's one person gets one thing out of it that gets them on 1 degree for better, I'm kind of happy with that, and I'm starting to see the fruits of it now, where, you know, I've done so much stuff for people that I forget I've done, and they'll come up to me like, "Oh, hey, you did so and so," and I'll be like, "Oh, yeah," because for me, it's just like it comes in, I react, I deal with it, and I just move on to the next, and I just forget about it. And so maybe one of the cool things that will hopefully happen in time is, more of these will come up. I'll be like, "Oh, yeah, that's right, I did this thing that helped the person," but it's never. I don't really keep tabs on any of it. If anything, I probably forget more than I've probably done. But I like these. I like these stories when not when like legends or whatever pass away, and then these crazy stories come out with, "Oh man, there was this time he so and so did this." Like, it'd be just cool to have a whole bunch of random ones that you even forget that other people don't, that made a positive impact on others. And I think that could be pretty cool. So, maybe I'm just playing a bit of a generational game for cooler stories of others. And I think, well, I would hope anyway, with the amount of relationships that I have out there with a huge array of people, no one knows who's in my circle. I don't tell anyone who I talk to, and I don't tell anyone publicly who I'm with. I keep kind of, for as public as I am, the things that truly matter and the people that truly matter are never seen. And I think they respect that, and I also respect it, because I don't want them to feel like I'm like leveraging them for their profile or their power or their influence. Like, I don't ever want to be questioned on that. That's why I like everything just kind of by design off the flipping grid. So then I can just go do my thing, and then everything else is like, the ones that matter can stay in silence. And that's kind of, I guess, how I've sort of navigated. But it means a lot for me, because those back channels that you have and those relationships with those in influence and power, they can genuinely help people, and they've been able to help people multiple times. And I think the more I've realized is, the more power and influence or whatever it is that you get, the more good you can do for others. As shitty as it sounds, it's flipping 100% true. Because when you know those keys to get into those doors to make those things happen, that's all that matters. And I think the other side at that point too is they know you're not pissing around. They know what your intent is. They know what you're there to do, and they know what, that you mean well, and you're trying to do good, and usually not for yourself. And I think when you tie all those things up, you kind of become a little bit of an unstoppable force, because you're not doing it for you. Do you know what I mean? And so that's where I think hopefully things will probably navigate to in the future.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I love that answer. And it comes back to that relationships, and also that doors may have opened, or you've opened doors that you can then crack open for the other people following behind you. And that, you're an example then to others coming along. I think it's an amazing thing. If, like, for example, if you can introduce two people and they then go off and do something cool, and then you find out about it later through a third channel, and it's like, "Oh, wait a minute, how did you guys meet?" Well, it was at that lunch you organized, or it was that intro you did. Like, that's pretty special, isn't it? Because then you're being the catalyst to empower more good to be done. You've mentioned your Maori heritage. I'm learning more and more about Te Ao Maori, and to me, it's this incredible source of wisdom and strength. If we talk about words like kaitiakitanga, stewardship or guardianship, that it's not all about you. In the Western conception, it's very often about, well, look at my car, look at my house, look at my bank account. Whereas in Te Ao Maori, it's a much more holistic view of the world. And actually, you aren't even you in some ways. You represent all the people who've come before you, and you're there to guard and shepherd the people who are coming and helping them. Has that been an influence in some of your thinking as well?
So at a start point for years, no, because I was living it and I didn't, I was just doing my thing. I didn't realize I was different. I didn't realize, I mean, I knew I was different, but I didn't think of it like culture as an asset or liability. I knew people, like a lot of people gave me shit for being Maori when I was younger, and jokes and this and that. But as I got more into the business world, I started seeing more of that from the race side, and not always for good, if I was being honest. And then what I've sort of seen in this last little bit is watching the narrative and the energy shift around those in commerce when it comes to culture. And it's becoming pretty clear that what was seen as a liability for many is now essentially one of the biggest assets we have. If you look at the world of, tech and businesses, everything gets flattened and AI and processing, blah, blah, blah. Like what remains, right? It's creativity, it's brand, it's storytelling, it's care, it's people, it's relationships. So those go more to the soft side of things and definitely leaning more into the cultural side. So, one of the biggest things, I'm very proudly Māori, like I've always answered the phone since I was 15 years old saying kia ora, Robett speaking, since day one. People gave me shit for starting it, and now it's kind of cool, but I've just done my thing. I do feel like Māoridom right now, I feel it's at a pretty risky spot where there's plenty that are wanting to exploit the culture for commerce or exploit the culture for to tick boxes or exploit the culture to to just try and position them in a different light in public and all sorts. So it's quite a dangerous place where it feels Māoridom is right now. And obviously I'm on this big text chain, which a bunch of other sort of Māori heavy hitters in the space, in the tech space. And basically I don't say anything. Why? Because I'm the young buck on the chat and it's not my place to say it, so there's always this level of respect for that culture too. So, which I do think is good. But there are some pretty big issues, which I hope get more embraced by many, and culture tries to keep control of its own culture and not let it get exploited by others for the wrong thing. So I guess I'm a little bit more protective of it now, I guess. But always been super proud, like always rock my greenstone, always sound Māori, always like it's pretty easy. And I think it is a bit of a superpower. I think it's awesome. And the more people that realize that, the better.
Yeah. It's interesting because you are so involved in commerce and business. What I'm seeing as a trend is that people are more having the realization that there is a paradigm shift occurring right now, where in the past, people thought about business, they immediately thought about profit. How much can I make for the shareholder? And going forward, it's much more about profit to be sustainable, to fulfill a purpose. There has to be the combination of profit and purpose. And when you come and look at iwi-based companies or enterprises, they often will have intergenerational plans, which is something that is a much more holistic way of looking at a company or a business, rather than just, well, what's the quarterly profit report and how can I sell this thing for the most money to exit? It's a different way of thinking, I think.
Well, it's chess, not checkers, right? Like Māoridom and culture are playing chess long game. A bunch of these other transactions and commerce is short game checkers, and it's pretty simple to see who the long game winner is going to be. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, for most of the businesses driven on profit is around shareholders, right? And so I think when the voice of the shareholders become tweaks enough where people actually buy into what they're wanting to say, then I think business will change. But until then, that there's a fundamental shift in what the outputs of what success could be like, whether it's quarterly earnings or whatever. Nothing will change until that does. So you always follow the money, and you can usually figure out what's going on pretty quick.
But I think people like you have a role to play as well to talk about this more, and that purpose is a key part as well. When you come to invest, or you're looking at a business, how you can support them, what are the type of things that you're looking for, or how do you go about supporting an entrepreneur coming up?
I usually try and shortcut to the quickest way for them to make a ninja move. I call them ninja moves, right? Like usually they'll be so stuck in the little bubble, they haven't zoomed out to actually think of, who's the smartnership, like who's the smart partnership, which they could do. Whereas, have they actually looked into what currently exists in the market? Have they thought about talking to? Because as soon as you do a ninja move, you can think about who you actually need to talk to, and that's just a person. And as long as you've got the relationship with the person, you can get to them. So I always just think about ninja moves, like the fastest way possible, as soon as possible, to get them 10x, 100x, whatever. Because when you've got the game cracked, I'm still only 30, I'm only 36 now, but I know that, if I was 56 and I've been in the game for, another 20 years, regardless what business or vertical comes in front of my way, I can pretty much know who'd be able to talk to and plug them into. Like, oh yeah. And then you've got to go through, you can have the connection, which is easy, but then you got to go through due diligence to make sure it's the right sort of play. Is it the right fit? Is there, all the rest of it? That stuff comes later. But yeah, I go straight to the kill of like, what is the fastest way to get the quickest win right now? Cool. And what is, what is something that no one else has really thought of? Let's do that, because I think when you just copy paste others, you don't really make progress. When you're genuinely, creative and authentic and brave enough to who you are to do something a bit differently, that's when you get a bunch more disproportional upside.
Yeah, that's good. And you mentioned relationship there as being really key, knowing who to call on, knowing who to introduce to. I can't even ask how many people you would have met in your lifetime, but I'm guessing it's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. Can you describe your sense of when you first meet someone? Can you tell, is those first 5 seconds, can you tell, how much can you tell from that versus sort of the longer term getting to know people? I'm just curious about that as someone who's met a lot of people.
Yeah, so I'm kind of insanely lucky where I can pretty much remember, like, every person I've ever met, I can pretty much remember their face. I won't remember the name as such, but I remember the face and the energy. And like, perfect example, I was at the gym the other day, and I sat down as a dude next to me, and I literally remembered him from like a year and a half ago. We met, and he was, he was into like greenstone stuff, whatever. And I was like, oh yeah, hey, yeah, I forget your name, but yeah, we met, you're talking about the greenstone, blah, blah, blah. And he just like couldn't believe that I'd remembered him. But in my head, I was like, no, because I remembered like the moment, and so IQ wise, I'm not that smart, I'd say. I failed high school, couldn't get into university, but EQ smart, I feel I'm pretty flippin' epic. Like I can roll into a room and I can pretty much like read and decode. And because I've got this, I love the chess thing too. I can then go into their mind a little bit to be like, okay, my perfect example was last Wednesday. Some stuff's going on with this other business, and I was on the phone call about it as a bit of a code red emergency for a friend of mine. And I was just looking at it and I said, you know what? If I'm then in this moment for what their world is, this is how I'd see it. And this is what I think I'd do next. And then honestly, 48 hours later, they announced the launch of this next little thing, and we flipping called it. And everyone was like, how did you pick that? And I was like, dude, you can kind of see it. So the way I kind of think about it is I'll just put my energy into theirs. I'll see the world out as if I was them. But then I put the layer on of like how they roll, what's their moral and ethical compass, what their energy is like, where's their skill set. And that's how I kind of put it that way. But yeah, basically I can roll up probably like 8 to 9 times out of 10, I can basically get a read on someone like real quick. It's been a lot harder through COVID and stuff because everything's been on, obviously on like screens, and you can't feel the person in the energy. And one of my biggest weaknesses and strengths was that, my biggest strength is usually if I'm physically in the room and my energy can come with me. But to be able to try and make these calls from, through screens, I've definitely probably stuffed up a lot more remotely. That's probably been accurate. I probably haven't had as good of a read. So, I mean, I'm getting better slowly, but I'd say 80 to 90% I can pretty much read. You can read the energy of someone wants something real quick. You can read the energy if someone's not fully been honest. You can read the energy, the way they talk about others. You can, like all that stuff's super easy. Watch how they talk about others. Watch how they talk about themselves. Watch how they, how they interact with others. A big one's, I look for the small things. Like do you look the waiter in the eye and say what's up and ask them? Do you open the door for the lady as you're coming out? Do you like just these small stupid things? But I think I can tell a lot about someone. And I think probably the good thing from my side now is there is so much of me out there where it would be impossible for me to fake it. Like there's just too much. You can't fake the amount of stuff that I've sort of put out. So in some ways I kind of feel like more like open for all of it because I feel already pretty exposed and transparent anyway. Like I obviously stuff up and a whole bunch, whatever, but for the most part, 80 to 90%, I can pretty much read within the first minute. after I ask the first question, I can pretty much already pick it. I can usually pick where they sit in the ecosystem, what they're potentially after, what their vibe is, who they may know. And then the good news is, because when you get to a point, you pretty much know anyone in the back channels anyway, you can just do a stealth cred check. And this is something that I've realized is you send a text to someone with their name and you just like GC, yes or no, cred check, stealth. And then if they reply back and said, we should talk, that means that it's a no-go. Or if it's like legend, they're a legend. Right. And so what many people don't realize is before someone interacts with you, if they're going to do something, they've probably asked around, and you better hope like hell that you haven't pissed off too many people, because that will come back to bite you. And I've seen it happen many times. So that's what I would like. I like the idea of, if you're going to mess with me, you already know what I look like, talk like, sound like. You either like me or you don't. You know I can execute. The only thing you're trying to figure out is if you can trust me. And then you'll ask around and you'll have a chat. And the majority of the time, if someone's coming for a first banter and it's going to be potential business, they've already done the rest of the due diligence. They're just trying to figure out if they can trust me or not.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I love what you're saying as well, because to me, in a way, thinking back to how we started the conversation, you know, your childhood growing up in a multi-ethnic, very different environment in Fiji, but then you've also lived in Japan. And I know I lived in Japan for 5 years, and I think I learned a lot from the Japanese way of doing things, which is it's a very subtle way of doing things, but they will have meetings with people and they'll get a sense. And because they're often consensus-based, consensus-driven. So I worked at a trading house called Mitsui in Tokyo for 2 years. And I think there was 8 or 9 of us who were foreigners, and there was 5,000 Japanese people in the building. So it was an amazing environment. But I learned so much from that. And I think it's helped me to realize that empathy, or that asking some questions and drawing people out to understand their perspectives before you say something can be really a useful tool. And it sounds like because you've had so many experiences with different cultures and different ways of being, you're able to project yourself into the skin of the other person, which then gives you a bit of a superpower to really know, well, this is probably what they're angling for.
Yeah, and it can become pretty lethal pretty quick. I mean, but the best thing I love is when I can stand into a room, and when the other side genuinely knows you need nothing from them and you need nothing from them, you can actually have an actual, honest, authentic conversation, and the relationship gets a lot deeper, a lot quicker, because there is no game being played. You think about the majority of other games, there's always leverage or money, or someone's got something that you want. There's always a game being played. And I think when you can like genuinely like exist and communicate and interact with people, and they know that you don't need anything from them and you don't care, and you're just genuinely saying what you think, how you think it, and why you think it, the level of respect gets so much quicker, so much faster, because you may disagree on points, but at least you're respecting the others for being upfront, saying how they feel and what they believe and why. And I think that's such a powerful thing. Like, I love the fact that now, regardless who I'm in the room with, there is no other agenda. It's like, I'm just going to say and do my thing. You're going to do your thing. It is what it is. If it pops, sweet. If not, next, and it gets so much simpler when there's no power in the way, there's no leverage from the other side. Like, life gets so easy. It's not like they're a client you're trying to win over and you're doing the fake lunch, rah. It's like, stuff that, like, life's too short to piss around with that stuff for me. I can't do it. So.
Yeah. No, that's really good. Yeah. So, we've talked about chess and the long game and playing the long game. One of the pictures that I find really helpful when I'm thinking about my own life and how I'm using my time and what it is that I invest in, is this concept of planting seeds of trees, knowing that you won't sit in the shade, because you're playing that intergenerational, 30 years, 100 years from now, what are the things that I'm doing? Can you just describe, because often in the first half of life, we're very concerned about what our CV says, what qualifications we've got, what job we've got, that type of thing. The second half of life is often about what will people say when I'm no longer here? Can you just reflect maybe, and we're drawing to an end of the interview, just thinking about, what is it when you get to the end of your life? what is it that you want people to reflect back and remember about who you were?
So one of my biggest drivers now that I've said it multiple times, is it's a fear of future regret. So one of my biggest drivers is to be old and be like, oh man, I shoulda, coulda, woulda. Man, I wish I would have dot or try. And that's why I just try and give everything a go. I don't care. I'm like, stuff it. Let's give it a crack. Like if it doesn't pop, sweet. But if it doesn't, I'll be the first one out in the public lines that are like, yep, that didn't work. So I'm ruthlessly fearless around trying, because I'd rather deal with the public scorn of many for failing than like the private, like innerness of that like just builds up like resentment against myself for not being brave enough to try. So that's it. Because at the end, and as far as the long game is, people don't realize, but now we've converted into this world of digital and social and stuff. Like I always think about like my children's children will be looking at my Facebook stream from when I was their age. What I was thinking, what I was saying, where I was going, what I was doing, like my digital footprint of who I am as a being will be so imprinted and so thing that, nuggets of gold may last for centuries. There might be snippets that people be, this could be watched in like hundreds of years time, literally on another planet, and being like, man, how crazy was my great granddad? The dude was nuts. Or like the dude was, whatever it may be. Like that's possible. Like if now I could see, my granddad and grandma, like Ron and Betty, absolute legends who I was named after, man, if I could look at a visual time stream of them at like 15, 17, 20 traveling the world, like what they thought about, politics and space and, religion and people and community and society and currency, like, we've been able to basically that. So I think of it like I'm documenting my existence for generations that I'll never meet. So if you're watching, what's up?
Yeah. That's awesome. I love that.
It's a different game. I don't know, man. I'm just playing a different game.
Yeah, no, it's a different perspective for sure. And I think that's the thing. That's what I've taken from the interview, is having that long-term perspective and embracing it and not shying away from it. Because too often, particularly in the West, it is a very short-term limited thing. If anything, we're making a year plan. It's very rare to make a decade plan or a life plan. And that's really what we're talking about. I love family history. So I've researched my grandparents, and then I've gone back the next generation and stuff. And cool. My great grandfather wrote a book in like 1865 about his trip to Europe. And so I've got this little, time capsule of this person existed. I'm directly related, never ever met him, obviously, but it is a little bit like that with what we're producing today. And with the podcast seeds that I'm doing, this will be about episode 265 or so. And I'm archiving it up with the New Zealand Library. So it's like a digital record as well. And I figure at some point, someday, you're right, 100 years from now, maybe, somebody's going to listen to this and go, wow, that's what they were talking about back in 2021. That's interesting. So yeah, it's that long game thinking, isn't it?
100%.
Yeah. Well, Robert, it's been great to talk with you. I really appreciate your time. We've connected across time zones and continents to be able to do this. But I really appreciate your sharing with us about your childhood, the Habitat for Humanity days in Fiji. I think that type of influence affects people in ways that come out later in life. And then, talking through your childhood, your teenage years, the influence of that guidance counselor who fueled your fire, the influence of your father's passing, and then through to the idea of a chess game and planning for the future. So I'm really grateful to you for your time. I'm watching and I'll be watching and seeing what else you get involved in, and also how you can continue to empower people coming up behind and seeing an example. Is there any ways that you'd like to let people know about how to reach out or follow you? And I know you did a book a couple of years ago. How can they access more about what you're up to?
Yeah, the simplest way is just robett.com, just robett.com. It's got a bunch of my stuff there. Got some free, business education courses to help with, social media and LinkedIn and digital blueprints. And LinkedIn, I do a bunch of content. And my kind of thing is, if I can create value to help, scale value to others, and that's kind of my thing. And the business stuff always figures itself out, but fingers on lots of pies, and it's been working out pretty good so far. So it's been pretty good. So I definitely appreciate the time.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.